Piton ug iyang asawang bulanon
magtiayon sa lalawigan sa Bohol.
Ng isang dayuhan at ang kanyang asawang Pilipina.
7 taon ng mag-asawa sina Terence at Beth na nakatira ngayon sa lungsod ng Talibon, Bohol. Suportado ni Congresswoman Alexi Totor ang programang pabahay ng mag-asawang Martin sa probinsya ng Bohol dahil sa inisyatibong tumulong sa mga Boholano.
Don't forget to share.
Hey, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines and another late night go. Wanted to just looking at some of the pleasure that some of the books that I've read have given me. And one of the books that I love the most was by a writer called John Steinbeck. And John Steinbeck was one of the most brilliant writers in American literature. He suffered from he had very little time for critics, and often suffered really ridiculous ideas from what were given. He wrote a book called East of Eden, and East of Eden was a long book. It was written in book 1 and book 2, and his critic, who was a reader at one of the traditional publishers back then, that's how it was. You went, put your manuscript into the traditional publishers, and a reader would read your manuscript, and the reader, foolhardy man that he was, said, "Why didn't you just write one book? Why write 2 books?" Well, East of Eden became a classic and is an incredible piece of literature. But the one that affected me the most was a book called The Grapes of Wrath, or Wrath if you are American. In England we say The Grapes of Wrath. The Grapes of Wrath was about what happened at one period of history in America where a great period where there was no rain, right? So the drought was absolute killer, and it's what happened to the farmers, and certainly in Oklahoma, in the Midwest. They went through a terrible time, and it was a very difficult time in history. And in some ways, some of the ways that they had to decide their life was very similar to what's happening now, because right now some of the people in America especially are being presented with this idea that they must close down. I mean, we're suffering lockdowns, and back then what happened, it had its familiarity. There were parallels with what is happening now, but in essence what happened was the banks owned the land, and the way that happened was that when the drought was severe, then it would be just dust, and the farmers would not be able to plant and take a harvest. So they would go to the bank and they would borrow a little at the bank in order to survive. Well, gradually that little became a little more and a little more, and eventually they lost their farms and they became tenants. They became tenants on their own land, which was very difficult for a man to be able to admit to and to suffer through. So what happened was that they had to sell up, and these great tractors, which we are quite accustomed to now, that drive for miles in a straight line over thousands of acres on fields which can no longer be talked about as if they are fields, and they have them, and they were new then. what had happened was the people who now owned the land had realized that whereas they were supporting a lot of families, say, I don't know, 10 or 15 families, those 10 or 15 families were covering land and scratching out a living on dusty soil, and all they had to do was put a tractor in which could just drive, and they just paid the man wages, and they didn't have to pay anything in terms of a commission of the harvest. So that's what they did. And eventually the tractor drivers were instructed, there's a little more money for you if you accidentally tip the house and the barn when you're going along doing your job. And this is what happened in many cases. So the little houses, John Steinbeck felt this very much. You may have heard of Route 66. Route 66 was the road that all of these families travelled in their made-up pickup trucks with all of their positions on that looked like the Beverly Hillbillies. That was the model for the Beverly Hillbillies sawn off saloon car that had been made into a pickup and then a wooden bed put on. That's what these families travelled Route 66 to go to California, where they had been told they could pick a fruit off a tree in the street, which is not quite right. And then when they got there, they were badly abused, and it was a terrible time in history. But this particular part in the book was one which I've remembered all my life. I first read this book, like 40 or 50 years ago, and which is not hard. When you're 82, it's not hard to be able to say that. It's a sobering fact, in fact. So this is when it came to the point where they'd been told they had to get off the land, and they'd gone through all of the thing of saying, but where will we go? And then, almost by a conspiracy, the land was flooded with leaflets saying, come to California, where you can pick fruit and earn a living, bring up a family in California by picking fruit. And so they took to Route 66, but before they did that, kicked the thing. Before they did that, they had to decide what they were taking. And I know this feeling because when I came to the Philippines, I had to leave behind a lot of my possessions, and it was difficult. Well, these people had a great deal of difficulty, and I'd like to read you a couple of pages of this. So this is chapter 9 if you ever go back and look at this book. In the little houses the tenant people sifted their belongings and the belongings of their fathers and of their grandfathers, picked over their possessions for the journey to the west. The men were ruthless because the past had been spoiled, but the women knew how the past would cry to them in the coming days. The men went into the barns and into the sheds. That plough, that harrow, remember in the war we planted mustard? Remember a fellow wanted us to put in that rubber bush they call a gayal? Get rich, he said, bring out those tools, get a few dollars for them, $18 for that plough plus freight, Sears and Roebuck's. Harness, carts, cedars, little bundles of hose, bring 'em out, pile 'em up, load 'em in the wagon, take 'em to town, sell 'em for what you can get, sell the team and the wagon too, no more use for anything. A terrible time. So junk piled up in the yard. I'm missing out huge amounts here. 50 cents isn't enough to get for a good plough. That cedar costs $38. $2 isn't enough. Can't haul it all back? Well, take it. And a bitterness with it. Take the well pump and the harness. Take halters. Take collars, hams and tugs. Take the little glass brow band jewels. Roses red under glass. Get those for the bay gilding. Remember how he lifted his feet when he trotted? Junk piled up in the yard. Can't sell a hand plough anymore. 50 cents for the weight of the metal. Discs and tractors, that's the stuff now. Well, take it, all junk, and give me $5. You're not buying only junk. You're only buying junked lives. And more, you'll see, you're buying bitterness, buying a plough to plough your own children under, buying the arms and spirits that might have saved you. $5, not $4. I can't haul 'em back. Well, take 'em for $4. But I warn you, you're buying what will plough your own children under, and you won't see. You can't see. Take 'em for $4. Now, what'll you give me for the team and wagon? Those fine bays, matched they are, matched in colour, matched the way they walk, stride to stride. In the stiff pull, straining hams and buttocks, split-second time together. And in the morning, the light on them, bay light. They look over the fence sniffing for us, and the sniff ears swivel to hear us, and the black forelocks. I've got a girl, she likes to braid the manes and forelocks. Puts little red bows on them, likes to do it. Not anymore. I could tell you a funny story about that girl and that off bay would make you laugh. Off horse is 8, near is 10. But might have been twin colts the way they work together, see? The teeth, sound all over, deep lungs, fair, feet fair and clean. How much? $10 for both? And the wagon? Oh, Jesus Christ. I'd shoot them for dog feed first. Oh, take 'em. Take 'em quick, mister. You're buying a little girl, plaiting the forelocks, taking off her hair ribbon to make bows. Standing back, head cocked, rubbing the soft noses with her cheek. You're buying years of work, toil in the sun. You're buying a sorrow that can't talk. But watch it, mister. There's a premium goes with this pile of junk, and the bay horse is so beautiful. A packet of bitterness to grow in your house and to flower some day. We could have saved you, but you cut us down, and soon you will be cut down, and there'll be none of us to save you. And the 10 men came walking back, hands in their pockets, hats pulled down. Some bought a pint and drank it fast to make the impact hard and stunning. But they didn't laugh, and they didn't dance. They didn't sing or pick the guitars. They walked back to the farms, hands in pockets and heads down, shoes kicking the red dust. This is a book that is a real emotional experience. So that's John Steinbeck and The Grapes of Wrath. Thanks for listening and indulging me, and bye for now.